So to understand what we're doing with identity, I think it's first important to look at the privacy model. So we want to make sure that everyone has the information they need, but no more than the information they need. This is important to both states, so that when you put a contract state on the ledger, it isn't available to anyone who doesn't need to see it. But we also do a defense in depth, so we don't want identity data leaking through someone seeing a state. For example, a party that sees a state may not necessarily need to know who all the other counterparties are. I want to be able to restrict that. At the same time, it's really important that the organizations can show they've done proper checks and they know who everyone are, KYC, all this sort of verification. So first of all, to identify who someone is on Corda, they are assigned, they are onboarded by creating a key. They create a certificate signing request and send it to R3 along with proof of the ownership of that identity, the form of which will change depending on who is creating the requests. We will then issue them a certificate and return it. It's a very, very similar process to any other TLS certificate issuance. Once they've got that key, that certificate and key, that's then used to create one-time keys and certificates that are on a transaction. So if we go on to the next slide. Cheers. So here we're creating a certificate that only the parties that need to know have. So, Bank A in this example would create a new key. They would create a certificate for it and sign it with their own key. And then they give the public key and certificate to their counterparty to say, here is the key to use for this transaction, and here is proof that we own it. That key, that public key, becomes part of the ledger. The certificate does not. So the state on the ledger cannot be used to identify the party without the external certificate as well. This is very similar to the Bitcoin model with some differences in that there's no global visibility, so you're increasing your anonymity that way, improving anonymity. The next thing we're looking at doing is adding a directory. So if you've got something like a BIC that you want to look up the organization for, there will be a central directory, also not central directory, some sort of directory service, be it centralized or decentralized, and that's still under consideration. But you can say, I've got BIC X, I'm looking for the counterparty, for the party that matches, participant. And the directory will say, it's this participant, or I don't know. You would then go to the network map service and say, where is the contact point for this participant? So if you know you've got a transaction, an out of a trade negotiated with a party with a BIC, you can then identify where to contact them, the correct details for them. You can see the certificate and the key are all signed by R3, so you know they're trustworthy, and then you start negotiating with them to get their one-time key for the state you're actually doing. If we move on to the next slide. Regarding, so the questions come up, regarding identity management, how does a participant manage all the certificates of all of its counterparties? So the identity service in the Corda node will provide that. And that will either be, that can either be integrated into the identity service, or we can look at mapping into other directories if that's the model we want to follow. So that's still being decided upon. I'd love any input that anyone has on that. If you've got directories that you want us to integrate with, please do let us know. The model I'm being led towards is that we want to build this directory internally ourselves. Now, one of the really cool things we're doing inside Corda is we have a concept of what's called a composite key, so that a bank signing something can have 3 keys in 3 different locations with 3 different people who have to actually authorize, and any 2 of those keys can be used, so no central point of failure with a key. And the composite key in Corda lets us describe the rules and the keys around that. We're looking at standardizing those keys and how the verification of the signatures happens, so that we can then build that into other open source tools, or other open source tools can implement that. So it can be built into existing infrastructure much more meaningfully, and we can, well, we'll be using standards by declaring standards, and everyone is on the same standard. Things that are coming up later, revocation list, obviously, so inevitably if we are issuing certificates, or anyone's issuing certificates, at some point that we need to revoke one because the key has been compromised or something else has happened. So support for hardware security modules, so tamper-proof hardware that even if it literally was taken out of the machine room, the keys would be unrecoverable without the correct access permissions. Integration, so one of the approaches for a directory would be a decentralized set of directory data, looking at using the distributed ledger to hold details of participants claiming an identity. So a bank might say, I own BIC blah, and that's been published to the ledger. Because we know who that bank is, because we're authenticated against R3, if they misclaim something, we can identify them, and there can be legal consequences. So that's then trustworthy, and this can be handled through decentralized data distribution, which is another topic I'm not going to dive into today too much. Alternatively, we can use oracles. So, and the big upside to using an oracle is that a participant can say at time t, I want to be able to prove that I was using the best data available. I wasn't working on out-of-date directory data, but this is what the directory held at this point in time. And that's really good for me able to prove that they've done proper KYC and that they are talking to the right people at any point in time. The other thing is, at the moment, each Corda node can only represent one legal entity. It can handle multiple services but one legal entity, and we'd like to be able to extend that so that for smaller organizations they can share nodes. Does that all make sense? If there are any other questions, do feel free to ask.
Thank you very much, Ross, and there's quite a lot in that, so we'll hold it open for a minute or so just for people to think of questions. Yes, that's very helpful.
By standardization, I mean probably on RFC, so that would go around for review and also get a lot of people to actually look at the design and make sure that they're happy with what we're doing and that it makes sense for their use cases.